What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Morello Show, episode number 22. So excited to be back with you guys. And this week we have a very special guest on, Access Twins writer, baseball podcaster, and Midwest resident, Brandon Warne. Brandon, how are you?
Hey man, I'm doing good. Good to be on the show.
Yes. All right. Well, we have a lot to talk about today. This is the unfortunate MLB lockout needs to end episode. So let's get right into it. Brandon, this lockout started December 2nd, 2021. We are over 2 months later and it's still going on. Doesn't seem to be an end in sight. Pitchers and catchers was supposed to start this week. What is the number one reason, I guess, why the lockout is still going on?
I don't think, excuse me, I'm just shuffling here. I don't think the owners are negotiating in good faith. And the honest truth is, every time the players propose something, the owners give very few concessions that make any sense. You know, they've agreed to some things, but it's a lot of back burner issues like universal DH and that sort of thing. It's, you know, the issues are, excuse me, with player pool money for guys who are, you know, really good players in their early years getting extra bonuses and luxury tax stuff. And then now MLB pulled out this thing in the last few days or the last time out, where it was like eliminating more minor league players, which makes no sense because the CBA doesn't even cover that. So honestly, it's just it's a power play by ownership right now. And you see a lot of frustrated fans, but you also see a lot of frustrated players, and it's justified because there's just nothing right now that feels that optimistic. And I was optimistic up until the point where they the most recent negotiation beforehand. You know, I'm trying to think of what the exact concession was that the players are trying to get, that the association or the league rather was not going to cave on. But it was about 2 meetings ago where I was just like, oh man, no, we're not close here, and we're not really close at all because the owners just aren't where they need to be, frankly.
No, I agree. And I kind of agree with that too. I did feel like we were making some progress up until a few weeks ago. And then especially this past Saturday's negotiations, I guess, didn't go well. There wasn't really anything agreed upon. So, you know, I'm kind of frustrated because it doesn't seem like the owners actually want baseball to happen. It just seems like they only want, you know, financial incentives that come along with owning the teams. Is that something that you kind of see too?
Yeah, I mean, for lack of a better way to put it, they're holding the sport hostage, and it's not just from the players, it's from the fans too. And I hope a lot of fans who think that players make too much money realize that that money has to go somewhere. The game generates that money, and if it doesn't go to the players, it goes to the owners. Those ownership groups are wealthy beyond the public's understanding. You know, for every player that makes $4 million, like, they'd have to make that for hundreds of years to make the billions of dollars that these owners are worth. And so you might see a guy playing and say, oh, that looks easy, it's not worth a $10 million a year salary. Well, then stop watching, because your dollars are in some form or fashion contributing to how much they make. Your cable subscriptions, the t-shirts, the tickets, whatever you buy that creates that bottom line, that money goes to the players or it goes to the owners. I'm going to pick the players over the owners every single time.
10 times out of 10, absolutely. I mean, the players are the ones who are bringing in the fans and generating the revenue that the owners get. So that is completely understandable. But I guess going back to that, with the lockout obviously still happening and spring training coming up and, you know, games starting to come up too on top of that, do you think the owners will blink at all when it comes to losing money from games and revenue like that? Or do you think they'll hold strong and wait for this to resolve?
It's tricky because they lose credence if they say they're losing money with games not being played when they try to claim they're losing money with games being played, or like they're not making that much money. So it's kind of a catch-22 for them. It's just the players are basically like, well, if you want to convince us that you're not making that much money off this, show us your books. And nobody will do that. And there's a reason for that. I mean, the teams that collect revenue sharing and broadcasting contracts from the league, I think they clear 80 or 90 million a year before the first hot dog is sold or the first ticket is sold. So, I mean, to say they lose money with no games being played is tough because they're also not paying stadium staff. They're also not paying stadium upkeep. They're also not cleaning the stadium. They're not doing a lot of things that cost them money to make the games happen either. And I think that's kind of the ace in their back pocket, is that they can claim that they're losing a whole bunch of money by games not being played and look sympathetic, when in fact it's probably not as big of a deal as we believe. So basically what it comes down to is it's a lot of misdirection. It's a lot of bad faith negotiating through the media and through back channels that it's not serving anybody well. My initial thought was that they would eventually realize, listen, you got to get these games going. You can have a shorter spring training. We saw it with summer camp in 2020, and we've seen it with some of the players I've talked to say spring training's too long. It's 2 weeks too long, and relievers get up to speed pretty fast. Starters get up to speed kind of however they do. But at the same time, we're going to need at least a week from whenever this CBA gets signed and the ink is dry to get these players down there. And we're not close. I'm at a point now where I think in 2 weeks, if there's not an agreement, we're going to lose regular season games. And I'm not very positive that they're going to get close to that.
No, not at all. And the other thing that's kind of crazy too is that they don't seem to have a sense of urgency. I mean, and that's honestly kind of on both sides, but obviously this is more on the owners that, they take a week to in between meetings. They take 10 days in between meetings. Like, do you think that sense of urgency will pick up as we start getting more into March and later into when the games are supposed to be going on? Or do you think they'll be at the stalemate?
I mean, it has to, because what they're not considering is, so when games were canceled or didn't happen at the beginning of the 2020 season due to the global pandemic, it wasn't a competition against other sports. No sports were being played, so they weren't necessarily losing fans to other sports. Think about this, though. If they miss April and even some of May, let's just say hypothetically, that's NBA playoffs. And if you're an NBA casual, you still think NBA playoffs are pretty sweet. I mean, they just are. Yeah. NHL playoffs, which are also crazy. And the NFL is always going to dominate the news cycle. You're talking about the draft, you're talking about rookie mini camps and that sort of thing. And so it's going to be a situation where they're going to lose fans due to sheer attrition, because crazy stuff is going to be going on in other sports. So, if I'm a big baseball fan like I am, and I don't care about the NBA, but I need something to watch on a Tuesday night, and you've got the Lakers and I don't even know who else, or you got the Nets and the Bulls or something in the playoffs, whatever. I'm going to watch that. I'm going to check it out. And there's all these players who are very entertaining, even on the teams that are going to be like in the play-in tournament or in the 6th seed. All these teams have at least one or two guys who are super exciting. Either they're young or they're established and they've been around forever. That's what MLB is already competing with. You strip away those games, it's not good. It really isn't. And I don't know what the owners are thinking, because they're doing more damage to a sport that, I mean, it's doing okay, but it doesn't need any more damage to what it's already doing by shooting itself in the foot.
Absolutely. And I think there's already, like you said, enough scrutiny for, trying to make the game more exciting and getting younger fans involved. So the key component of that obviously is playing games. And if you're not playing games, like you said, it's very easy for someone to turn on the TV and see Luka Doncic putting up 40 points and be like, oh, maybe I'll be a basketball fan now instead. And, you don't have anybody like Ronald Acuna in your TV. You don't have anyone like Pete Alonso, anybody like that. So it's hard.
Every team has a Ronald Acuna in the NBA, based on marketing. I mean, even Sacramento traded Tyrese Halliburton, but they got Domantas Sabonis, who's exciting. He puts up a double-double every night. I mean, even the bad teams, I was trying to figure out Indiana Pacers stuff tonight for work. They've got Tyrese Halliburton now, who gets like 6 assists every single game. And like, he's been double digits the last 2 weeks. Every team has a guy who's interesting. Meanwhile, baseball can't even market Mike Trout, the best player that has played in either your or my lifetime, most likely, maybe outside of Barry Bonds. And baseball just cannot seem to figure it out outside of giving him a Subway commercial every now and then. It's nonsense.
Absolutely. And that's a whole nother issue that they need to figure out. But if they want people to be watching their games and, the clubs and whatnot, they need to be on the field playing. And I think that's
Yeah.
something the owners need to realize. And
Mhm.
I think they just think that money is over everything. And it's just not. And you're going to lose money, and you're going to lose fans, and you're going to lose people buying tickets and going to the games because, I mean, the MLB ballpark experience, I think, is the best in-person experience of all the four professional sports.
Yeah, it's the character and the intricacy of the parks, and then the pace of play allows for more roaming around. You get to an NBA venue, I'm sure you could probably get in and sit down an hour early. But even then, you're going to see some cool dunks, and you're going to see guys hit like 24 or 25 3-pointers wide open. But it's not like batting practice where you might catch a homer, or a player might walk over and sign an autograph, or you buy some food and just sit down and kind of take in the 360 view. At a football stadium, you get some of that, but like the NBA arenas that I've been to, and it's not been that many. Even the cool ones, they just don't hold a candle to what MLB can give you in terms of an in-game experience. But again, do you care more about the in-game experience on field, or do you care about what's around you? And that's kind of the dilemma. At the NBA, you're watching the court the whole time because that's how exciting the game is.
Exactly. And, one thing that when my family loves to do when we go to games is we walk around a little bit. Maybe it's, a little
Mhm.
bit late in the game, fourth, fifth inning, but take a stroll, see other parts of the ballpark and, get food too. And when you get food, you can see the action going on usually from like the concession stands and whatnot, depending on,
Mhm.
which stadium and where you are in the stadium. In other leagues, you can't really do that because you have the concourse on the inside, especially for NBA and NHL arenas.
Mhm.
So it's harder that way. But they have games being played, and that's the bottom line. The MLB does not have games being played right now. No, and the
Right.
other thing I was going to bring up too is the hot stove was absolutely burning before the lockout was instated, and that's one of the key elements for all four professional sports leagues is the offseason and free agency and trades and whatnot that gets people going. Like, is that something else that could deter fans from watching baseball?
Yeah, and I mean it's going to heat up again because just from a sheer fact that there's going to be a week to get this stuff all figured out, and it's going to be crazy, and that'll be good for that news cycle. But it'll also make the next regular season where players sign like one a day for 3 months seem that much more dull. You've got that frenzy at midnight when NBA free agency opens. And you're like, oh, all these guys are signing pretty fast. I wonder if there was something kind of weird going on there where there was maybe a little tampering going on. Now, I know they got legal tampering and all that stuff too, but the other thing too, and I wrote about this on Access Twins, is there's kind of a weird dynamic where, so the lockout was instituted on December 2nd. And for instance, the Twins, who I cover, have been notorious under this regime for kind of waiting into the offseason, letting prices come down, kind of seeing all this. Well, in early December, they usually haven't made that many moves. And you can convince yourself that's okay because it's still early in the offseason. Now that it's February, it's not late in the or early in the offseason by any stretch of the mind, even though no real time has passed in the sense of that players could have signed. So this dichotomy of being early in the offseason and then super late in the offseason with no middle ground is going to be just it messes with your mind a little bit because now all fans are thinking about is, geez, the Twins need 3 more pitchers and maybe a shortstop, and they're not doing anything. And the difference when they weren't doing anything before was you knew when spring training was, you knew when that end point was. Now it's all arbitrary, it's all up in the air, and nobody, you've allowed yourself to go from early in the offseason to late in the offseason and have no middle period where you know what's going on. It's just kind of crazy. And so for fans, they're in a weird place too mentally because they see the holes on their teams, they see them not getting filled, and they don't see any urgency from ownership to get these guys back on the field. And it's a confusing time for people who do this for a living and digest this stuff on a different level. But even for fans, they don't know what to think, they don't know what to believe, they don't know what to do, and it's crappy, man. It sucks.
It does suck, honestly. And even for me, like I'm a Mets fan, and
Mm-hmm.
we had a very busy off season before the lockout
Right.
got instated. We signed Scherzer, Canna, Marte, Eduardo Escobar. So we were doing some things, but it's like it doesn't feel like it's complete yet, even though we're in mid-February now, because there's still talk of, will we trade for Chris Bryant? We need
Right.
another arm. Is Rodon coming? Like there's all these things. So, especially, for the Twins too, like, they, like you said, need some pieces still too.
Mhm.
So it's very frustrating from the fans' perspective as well. Like,
Yeah, you just let yourself sit and think. I mean, Rogers Hornsby said he just sits and stares, or well, he did in the 20s, sit and stare out the window and wait for baseball to come back over the winter. We're all doing that right now, except the difference is Rogers Hornsby knew when he was reporting to spring training. We don't know if it'll be spring training, summer training, or no training, and that's frustrating.
extremely frustrating. Yes. Especially because the Super Bowl just ended too. And usually everyone's
Yeah.
like, okay, baseball time. I mean,
Oh yeah,
obviously March Madness,
you
but
get a million baseball season tweets after the clock goes to triple zeros and they're giving the MVP and the guy says he's going to Disney World. Everybody's all jazzed up for baseball, and that just it was deflating, man. I mean, we're all just like, all right, lockout season, back to the negotiating table, maybe, whatever.
maybe. I mean, we'll see
Yeah.
when they actually meet again. But
Right.
it's crazy. But one thing that you had mentioned earlier was minor leaguers, and something I definitely wanted to talk about while I had you
Yeah.
here. Um, a lot has gone, there's been a lot of talk in the last few years about how minor league players are being treated, their housing, food, pay, whatnot. They did for this year, and I'm assuming moving forward, agree to pay for minor leaguers' housing, which
Mm-hmm.
is huge.
Yeah.
Um, what else? And you talked about eliminating minor leaguers. That has been talk around owners recently. What else would you like to see these minor leaguers get, because they are treated extremely unfairly, and there
Yeah.
needs to be change. So what's one thing, I guess, off the bat that you want to see?
For me, nutrition, honestly. And I think I see why teams do this. It's not that it's right, but think about it. No matter how well you treat these minor leaguers, you can only ever have 26 big leaguers at any given time. You can only ever have 40 guys on your 40 man at any given time. So from this pool of players, you're basically playing survivor. You're not giving them any resources. They're just figuring it out on their own to get there. If you throw a whole bunch of money and resources to take care of these guys, you're still only getting the same number of big leaguers. And that's penny wise, pound foolish, because you're not taking care of human beings. But I think that's the rationale, is like, you know what? We're going to have 26 big leaguers no matter what. If that 28th rounder scratches and claws and finds his way to the big leagues, and that second rounder doesn't, even though we gave him, 1.25 million, that's not our problem. And it's gross, man. Feed these guys decent food. You don't have to give them somewhere to live where they all live together, because actually I had a podcast with a guy who he pitched in the big leagues for a minute. He's from Minnesota. And I asked him, like, what if they did dorm housing and stuff? He's like, honestly, we also need time away from each other. Minor league baseball is already a grind, and you're spending so much time on the bus and all this stuff. You need some time to kind of decompress away from the field and away from each other. So you don't want to be like sleeping in dorms at the complex or apartments at the complex. You want to have a little bit of space too. So that to me is why nutrition is such a big deal. And it just humanizes people. I mean, give them, a piece of chicken and some rice and some vegetables rather than peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and sodas. It's literally poverty wages, poverty food for a multi-billion-dollar industry that's making millionaires left and right and a lot of players, and none of it makes sense to me. You say make it make sense, and it never will. And the other problem is, all of the players in the union are survivors of that process. What's their incentive to go back and throw their hands down to pull people up with them? Once you make it, you're like, I made it, I'm good. You're probably not as likely to try to fix things behind you, even though, you want to pay respect to people who came before you, but the people behind you, they can figure it out. And I think that's kind of part of the deal, is that MLB is like, I can only handle what I handle, and I have problems. I'm not going to try help other people because I can't. I got to fix my own problems first.
Which is gross. I mean,
Yeah.
like
Oh
you
yeah. It's
said,
horrible.
they are human beings who need to make a livable wage, which is, I feel
Mhm.
like, not a lot to ask for, but they
Mhm.
don't make a lot of money. They don't get paid in the off season. Now they're talking about not paying them for spring training. So now
Right.
they have to, report to spring
Yeah.
training. They have to fly there or bus there.
That was the one that told me, no, this is not going well. The two negotiation stints ago, I think it was 2 weekends ago or 10 days ago, when they said we don't want to pay for spring training. I was like, oh no, this is not going to go. This is not going to work.
No, not at all. And like, I feel like that's a very, very basic thing.
Yeah.
And they just, they don't want to include it there. I don't understand the penny pinching that billionaires are doing. If you can't afford to own a team, don't own a team. I bet you someone else will want to own a team.
And that's another reason why, too. I mean, the dynamic in minor league baseball is kind of screwy because you think, oh, cool, you won the AA championship, the Eastern League, or whatever. Well, first of all of your teammates you're competing against for future big league jobs. So while you in the shortstop, if you're the second baseman, might have a really good rapport, you're good at turning double plays, and you bat first and second in the order, and you make each other look good. You're probably still competing against that guy for a utility job or maybe the future second base job, depending on the organization. So you're already competing against your teammates, which makes it weird. You're trying to beat the other team, but you're trying to beat out your teammates. Then you get to the postseason, which is multiple rounds that you don't get paid for. So you're just playing more baseball for free. You got to figure out a host family. You got to figure out where you're going to live. In addition to the fact that that's not more paychecks coming in, you're just playing. So like the idea of winning in the minor leagues to a lot of players doesn't matter as much as I think we would hope, based on the fact of everything I just described, which again, it's just icing on a crap Sunday. It sucks.
Absolutely. And I was reading a thread earlier from Mark Appel, who's former number overall pick, first round pick a couple times actually. Yep. Most recently was with the Phillies, but he was talking about how minor league players have to choose between eating, training, and sleeping pretty much, which is horrible by every stretch of the imagination. Do you see any scenario where maybe not this negotiation, but maybe sometime in the next few years where we come out of this and say, you know what, let's get minor leaguers very basic things besides housing? I know we mentioned the housing and they did that already.
Yep.
But
I think it's going to be something separate from a CBA. I think it's going to be, I don't know if San Francisco is one of those teams, if Philadelphia is one of those teams. I think it was a Gabe Kapler team, and that's why I'm thinking, because he's big into nutrition. But it's going to be a cascade effect. I know Toronto was doing some stuff like that. Once one or two teams start taking care of their players and realizing that the cost to take care of these guys very, very well is less than the cost of a fifth starter for 1 year, much less than that. I think it's going to be a cascade effect where within 3 to 5 years, everybody else follows suit. It's just a matter of who's going to break through and do it first. And honestly, I really can't figure out why it hasn't happened yet, because again, I think it's just not seeing the forest for the trees. We can create 26 big leaguers by mistreating them and then making them have the burden of proof that they belong here, rather than, we give them all the country club access and whoever comes out of it, comes out of it. It's such a terrible way to look at human beings. It's a terrible way to look at developing baseball players. And yet it's been this way since before your parents, my parents, grandparents, generations on this planet. It's crazy.
And that's something else Mark Appel mentioned in that thread too, just kind of like, it doesn't take that much for them to like have these basic needs for minor leaguers, but yet the owners won't do it. And the other thing you said was like, once one or two, like kind of just you mentioned, one or two teams starts doing it, then everyone else will feel compelled. And I guess they're waiting,
especially if they see results. If the results are there right away, like let's say you have 3 or 4 guys that are not in your top 30 pop and become really good prospects. I don't know how they would gauge it as a success, but let's just say you got 3 guys in low A that nobody expects anything of. They put on some good weight, they get faster, they hit for a little more power. I think you see a couple of those and it's like, okay, this is not going to cost us that much to get these guys rounded into form and to give us a better chance of competing without spending that much money.
I really think it'd only take like 2, maybe 3 guys who like whoever the first couple teams that do it. Let's say it's let's say it's the New York teams, the Mets and the Yankees, which who knows, but
I mean, they have the money to do it.
They do. They absolutely do. So let's say they invest in nutrition and they invest in housing and give these guys livable wages, and someone outside the Yankees top 30 makes it in the majors and is an all-star in his first 2 years, and he's the talk of the town. Same
basically
thing on the Mets
Robinson
side.
Cano.
Yes, that's a very good example. Or, this is, I don't know if this is the exact example, but someone like Yasiel Puig, who just bursted on the scene in 2012 and he became this national figure. I mean, obviously it was the bat flips and the tongue being out and all that too, but
he was a sensation.
He was an absolute sensation. He was a great player, and he was in the home run derby at Citi Field the next year, and he was great. if you have people like that who come out of, maybe not out of nowhere, but who rise to the cream rises to the top and they pop,
Yep.
and then you say, okay, well, if they can get guys out of nowhere, we don't have to spend enough draft resources on them and blah blah blah. Who knows where we could find guys like this, and then they start popping. Do you see that scenario happening soon, or do you at all? What do you think?
I think a reasonable timeline is 3 to 5 years because I don't know. I mean, it's going to take some time to wipe the stink off of whatever's happening right now, assuming they agree to something in the semi near future, which in some ways I'm hoping for. And I want to be optimistic, but I don't know if I can really force myself to do that. But I think a 3 to 5 year span is how you go from maybe 3 or 4 teams to 10 teams to 15, kind of like how you build up a starting pitcher in spring training. You go 40 pitches, 65, 85, whatever, up to 100. It's just going to take building on top of each other to make the pyramid where everybody's kind of doing the thing that we're hoping they'll do. But that's 3 to 5 years from whenever it starts. Do we have any reason to believe it'll start now? Honestly, I don't right now, with the way that they're trying to subtract players and the way they subtracted teams in 2020 and reshuffled some affiliations. It's gonna be a 3 to 5 year process that I think we're maybe 1 or 2 years away from yet.
I think you just need one or two owners to blink, and then the rest will follow through. And that's kind of the one, going back to Mark Appel's Twitter thread earlier. That's what he was saying. And I agree. I mean, I don't know if I see anybody doing that this year, especially with the contract negotiations for the CBA going on. I think, like you said, maybe 3 to 5 years, which that's the best case scenario at this point, which is sad, but
change is slow in baseball. Because just the way the game is played. Change in football is a lot faster. Like, one team starts using the wildcat, and then a few teams are using it. Teams start using the run pass option. Other teams start using it. But change is wide sweeping in football because guys get hurt and the attrition rate's so big. Baseball is it's played at such a leisurely pace, and it's developed at such a slow pace. Your top prospect, if he's a high school kid drafted, he might not play for 3 years in the big leagues, maybe even 5. So, I mean, change is just so much slower in baseball for so many reasons. And that's why it's like, you want things to happen now, you want things to happen today. But if you're being realistic with what you see in front of you, it's, probably a half decade away.
Which is a really, really, it's a shame.
Yeah.
It's awful. But hopefully we get there at some point. I mean, minor leaguers deserve it. They deserve to have a normal, livable wage. It's like very basic human needs, like we've been saying. But hopefully one day. I guess last question for you here, going back to the lockout. I know we talked about the long meetings in between, and they don't really seem extremely close. Your best guesstimate on when you think, like, a realistic date for them to get this thing underway or over with and the season underway?
March 1. And that's as optimistic as I can be. I think when you start the calendar with a 3/1/2022, you start thinking, oh man, 3 and 4, that's 1 month away. We got to figure this crap out. I think that's when the urgency sets in, is end of February into early March. And, it's going to be if that happens, it's going to be a breakneck pace. Maybe it'll, maybe it will lead to shorter spring trainings in the future if it ends up being a success. But it's going to be really hard to see anything that happens here, a big success, unless, players get close to that 100 and whatever million they're hoping for, that extra payment pool. And, not kowtowing to this minor league demand, which is really, frankly, ghoulish. It really is. It's not even their jurisdiction. It's like trying to, if you're the FBI trying to go resolve a case that's in a small town and somebody stole something, like, just keep your nose out of it. It's not that necessary. So I'm hoping we're 2 weeks away, but anything more than that, we're in real trouble.
I'm actually going to be a little less optimistic than you, which is weird. I'm usually by nature an optimistic person. I was actually going to say, like, between March 8th and March 15th. I don't know. It seems like the pace is too slow right now. Of course, they could pick it up and have some back-to-back days where they meet and whatnot, but I don't have a lot of faith. I think Manfred is operating in bad faith as are the owners. And this is going to go on for a while, and the players deserve to get a lot of what they want. Nobody deserves to get everything that they want, but maybe a lot what they want.
Uh,
And I don't think their demands are too much.
I don't know if you're a fan of The Office, but when
Yes.
Michael's doing the deposition and he says, "I won't talk until Toby leaves," I feel like Michael is the players and Toby is Rob Manfred, and it should be like, listen, we're going to agree to a CBA, but get him out of here. We need a new commissioner. I don't know if you want Joe Torre. I don't know if you want anyone that's Theo Epstein, someone else. But I feel like that should be a condition. And pardon the language, but get that schmuck out of here because he has done so much damage to the game in
In a very short amount of time.
7, 8 years, 6, 7 years. I don't even remember what. I mean, it takes a lot for us to remember the days of Bud Selig wistfully. Like it really does. And that's where we are. It's just where we're at. And that sucks, man.
It does suck. And, obviously he wasn't a great commissioner, Bud Selig, but this is worse.
Appreciably worse.
Yes. So do you think that's a possibility, though, for him to get out soon? Or do you think something drastic would need to happen?
The fact that it hasn't come up yet probably tells me it won't. I'm just thinking, though, like, there's just no way to sugarcoat the damage he's doing to the sport and will continue to do until they make a change. And by definition, I mean, his job is to report to the owner. So he's going to have a semi-adversarial relationship with the players union as is. But I don't know. He's not productive in any way, shape, or form. I mean, he's making Roger Goodell look competent. Not quite Gary Bettman, but he's definitely making Roger Goodell look competent.
Not quite Bettman, but Roger Goodell looks far better. And Adam Silver doesn't even look like they're in the same field of job.
Adam Silver's a saint compared to this guy.
Yes. Yes. So it's very bad. Hopefully he doesn't set the sport back at all because that would be extremely detrimental. And that goes without saying, obviously.
Absolutely.
But, we're just going to pray, and we're going to pray that we get some baseball in the next couple months here. And, hopefully things go well, but we shall see. Brandon, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Again, we're going to pray the lockout ends soon. And thank you guys for tuning in as always. I appreciate it very, very much. Make sure you check out Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at The Morello Show. Subscribe on YouTube if you can. Would be much, much appreciated. And that's all I got. So again, Brandon, thank you very much for coming on, and we will see you all next time.